It's a great honor. It's a great honor for me and for us to welcome Professor Stefan Lorenz Sorgner as our keynote speaker, John Cabot University, Italy. So he's a contemporary world-class philosopher and a leading figure in current philosophical debates about future of humanity. The central theme of our Congress is widely recognized for his work in posthumanism, transhumanism, Eurohumanism, bioethics, and philosophy technology. Due to the influence of Friedrich Nietzsche and his thinking, Sorgner is often described as contemporary Nietzschean within posthumanist philosophy. He is author of numerous scientific brilliant articles and amazing books, and he serves as an editor-in-chief and founding editor of the Journal of Posthuman Studies. He has delivered many keynote lessons at prestigious international conferences. You can watch his videos and his speech on YouTube and visit his personal website. For us as musicians, it's special significant that he's an opera lover, and his reflections inspired by Wagner's dramas are deeply thought-provoking. So I personally became a fan of his ideas when I first came across a small portion of his writings a few years ago. So, dear professor, you can start your great speech.
Yeah, many thanks for your very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure being with you and to opening this conference. Yes, I am an opera lover, and in particular Wagner, but many other authors as well. In particular, also a lot of contemporary composers, and I closely cooperate with Sven Helbig, who I think is an extremely intriguing young composer, depending on what young means. um, no, he's just sort of released a wonderful Requiem, Requiem A, which was performed in several spectacular locations. I'm also going to be addressing sort of connecting, and there's a close connection between Richard Wagner's concept of the total work of art and what he describes his own works also as a total work of art, but as a non-totalitarian total work of art, in order to cover a lot of a lot of like worries from the humanities, from the tradition, from Thomas Mann, Adorno, and so on. Going back to the history of the origin of opera to understand the relevance of opera in our sort of in our life world. It has been distinctively influenced by artists, composers, and thinkers, in particular, sort of from German and Italian culture. Of course, other cultures played a central role, but like Italy in particular, where it was founded, was particularly relevant. The Camerata Fiorentina, they invented the opera, and Wagner and Nietzsche have significantly influenced the musical history by pleading for realization of the musical drama. In the 20th century, then, the debate on the question of opera as a total work of art was continued in Germany by Thomas Mann, and Italy by D'Annunzio. And these cultures have a lot in common. And their decisive reason for focusing on opera is that both cultures have a constant dialogue with Greek antiquity. The opera was born out of a misunderstanding of ancient tragedy, and that's important to keep in mind. And the orientation towards the ideal of ancient drama played a central role in numerous proposals for reforming opera. However, this approach, which focuses on the music drama, also has significant social implications. The unified total work of art requires a communitarian community in which the values and symbols represented are shared. And here lies the central problem that Adorno, Mann, and Popper explicitly address, the problem of totalitarianism. Therefore, the following challenges arise. Does a total work of art necessarily have to have totalitarian implication? Is it still permissible to aim for realizing a Gesamtkunstwerk? The contemporary German composer Sven Helbig is concerned with creating such Gesamtkunstwerke, and does it necessarily making a proponent of totalitarian ideologies? Or is there also a possibility of creating non-totalitarian total works of art? And this is a central question which I'll be dealing with, relating that to the issue of leisure. With his perspective as Nietzsche is a central philosopher who's turning away from totalitarian ways of thinking. What's the problem? It's basically Plato, Galileo, and Wagner. Plato can be regarded as the intellectual forefather of the musical drama, since the invention of the opera by members of the Camerata Fiorentina intensively dealt with his reflections on the music drama. But here the problem already begins. Popper has convincingly shown that Plato is an advocate of a totalitarian political order. Plato's reflections on the ideal tragedy are part of his proposals for revising them. He banned Homer and Hesiod from his ideal state and only allowed the performance of dramas that represented the idea of the good in terms of content, form, and material. Instead of being entertaining, music should promote the cardinal virtues. And this circumstance ultimately led to the invention of opera. Analogous thinking was in fact to be found among Florentine cultural workers in the middle of the 16th century. The musicians, thinkers, and music theorists of the Camerata Fiorentina were dissatisfied with the polyphonic music of their time, considering it morally corrupting. They wanted to create a musical drama inspired by the ancient tragedy, which would help to express the virtues. And this could only be done through monodic thinking, ancient Greek solo thinking, since this kind of music, in their opinion, represented the essence of ancient music. In order to develop the musical drama in the best possible way, they studied Plato's philosophy of music, drama in particular. Girolamo May, an expert in ancient drama, in ancient music and the philosophy of music, living in Rome, originally from Florence, helped Giovanni Bardi, the spiritus rector of the Camerata Fiorentina, and Vincenzo Galilei, a decisive head of this association, lutenist, singer, and father of Galileo Galilei, to better understand Plato's philosophy by explaining in letters the questions addressed to him. And one result of this exchange is the Dialogo della musica antica e della moderna, the dialogue of ancient and modern music by Vincenzo Galilei. Inspired by this writing, as well as by intellectual exchange with the Camerata, other members of this association, Jacopo Peri, music, and Ottavio Rinuccini, text, created the first opera, the melodrama Daphne, which unfortunately no longer exists. The two artists were also responsible for Eurydice, the first melodrama still preserved, which was premiered on 6th of October 1600 at Palazzo Pitti in Florence during the wedding celebrations of Maria de' Medici with the King of France, Henry IV. Today, their assessment of ancient tragedy is no longer shared. It's rather assumed that the choral parts were sung primarily, and this is due to the fact that there are numerous papyrus findings with notations of the choral parts. The protagonists mostly had spoken parts. Only occasional were parts with other dimensions found. For the speaking parts, a iambic trimeter was used that means spoken verse similar to colloquial speech. The choral parts, on the other hand, have the dimensions of choral lyricism and are constructed in the form of verses. Thus, the attempt to revive the ancient tragedy can also be called as an invention of opera, because sort of ancient, based on these findings, ancient tragedies were not operas. Structurally, Richard Wagner's reflections on the Gesamtkunstwerk are not unlike those of the Camerata Fiorentina. He had ethical intentions. Incidentally, Nietzsche already recognized the relevance of ethics in Wagner's works at a young age when he confessed the following in a letter to Erwin Rohde. What I like about Schopenhauer pleases me in Wagner, the ethical air, the Faustian scent, the cross, death, and tomb, Nietzsche in a letter to Erwin Rohde on the 8th of October, 1868. The dramatic aspects of his music drama also have an ethical, cultural significance on Wagner's works. He strove for a new form of dramatic unity. In doing so, he reacted to the separation of the arts, which he wanted to transform into a new unity. Bayreuth was to become the heart of a new community that was to represent an updated form of the ancient polis culture. He was by no means alone in this goal in the culture of the 18th and 19th centuries. For example, many thinkers tended to idealize the post-pre-modern world, which was accompanied by a critique of contemporary culture. Novalis went back to the Middle Ages or idealized the Middle Ages, Rousseau, a pre-cultural nature, and Winkelmann in relation to antiquity. So usually the story, current times are downfall, we need to return to a past ideal. Wagner noted that ancient drama was conservative, since the myth present in drama corresponded to the thinking and actions of the national community, which, however, was no longer the case in his own time. At that time, there had been a separation of the arts and also of society, as had also happened in the Athenian state when the common spirit split into 1,000 selfish directions, unquote, and dissolved the, quote, great total work of art of tragedy into the individual artistic components included in it, unquote. Wagner, for this part, wished for a return to a community that had grown out of the people and hoped to be able to support the social movement directed in this way with the help of his musical drama. He didn't think he could create it, but he could sort of support a movement which is actually occurring. Wagner's theoretical reflections on music drama began with his dissatisfaction with contemporary opera and his orientation towards ancient thought, which enabled him to work out an ideal for an artistic view of art. Yet the hope of being part of a cultural development that could overcome the particularism and nihilism of his time and make a new culture possible. Here it must be emphasized that Wagner did not assume that he himself could actively create a new culture with his work. It was clear to him that the culture could only come from the people, I quote. But it is precisely this bond, this religion of the future that we unhappy people are not able to make because we, as many as we may be of those who feel the urge for the artwork of the future within us, are only individuals, lonely. The work of art is the religion that is vividly portrayed. Religions, however, are not invented by the artist. They only arise from the people, he stressed explicitly. Wagner always emphasizes the creativity of the people or portrays the people as a true poet who would never think of singing a melody without words. The creativity of the people always finds its best expression in myth. He says, in myth, the common poetry of the people grasp the phenomena only as a physical eye can see them, not as they really are themselves, unquote. Since Wagner creates his dramas primarily for German rather than Greek culture, he draws on Germanic myth rather than others, because according to his theory, these are the ones that are appropriate for the German people. Wagner's concern was not alone a reactionary one, as just as Plato and Galileo were not solely affirming reactionary objectives. In any case, Wagner understood there could not be a return to past ideals alone, but that these had to be born in consideration of the recent history of new ones in order to have an analogous effect. Nevertheless, the idea of the unity of human nature is strongly anchored in Wagner's thinking. Only under the condition can he assume that the new cultural and political order he advocates can be an appropriate one. Hence, it becomes explicitly clear that metaphysics, and with it Wagner's dogmatism, is associated with vehement violence, namely violence against the diversity of human physiologies, against which a totalitarian structured culture is taking action. In this respect, Thomas Mann's well-known statement that there's certainly a lot of Hitler in Wagner's wanting to be based on Bramar, to perorize, to talk alone, to want to have to say in everything is certainly an accurate assessment. The reform proposal of Plato, Galileo, and Wagner presuppose a uniform human nature, which demands that certain human virtues are necessary for the good life. For then the Gesamtkunstwerk has an ethical concern that can only be realized in a communitarian community. However, such demands lead to a strongly paternalistic or totalitarian society. Is it necessary that total works of art have these implications? What about present times? Plato, Galileo, and Wagner wanted to reform and promote the dramatic. Another composer who called for an opera revolution also advocated the promotion of the dramatic, which can, of course, be understood primarily against the background of the opera seria of his time. However, Gluck was only concerned with an inner musical goal, the dramatic unity of opera music, because in this way, the language of the heart, the strong emotions, the gripping situation, and an ever-changing spectacle can be realized in the audience. With Plato, on the other hand, the promotion of political order was at the heart of the opera. With Galileo, the promotion of virtue, and with Wagner, the promotion of a new culture. They all had something in mind, but there were slight differences. They were interested in a holistic embedding of the musical drama in culture and life. Gluck's opera reform was therefore not concerned with the creation of total works of art, since their effect was not to extend beyond mere entertainment. However, if this is the essence of total work of art, then the question does indeed arise as to whether total work of art can be conceived that do not call for the creation of a totalitarian ideology. Are non-totalitarian total works of art in principle possible at all? Can musical dramas aim at an extra musical effect without being embedded in a totalitarian ideology? Here Nietzsche enters the stage, as he was realized that by inverting Platonism, truth gets abandoned too. By affirming naturalism, perspectivism becomes a philosophical necessity. There's a dialectical relationship between naturalism and perspectivism. Each one of these theories is being made plausible by the other one. This move has significant implications for the philosophy of arts, which Wagner did not realize. Wagner has a naturalist understanding of the world. For example, he recommended his son Siegfried to be instructed in Darwinist thinking, according to Cosima's diary. But he didn't realize that thereby the correspondent theory also needs to be abandoned. It's the realization which is being accommodated in Nietzsche's thinking, in particular when it comes to the arts, as he suggests that aesthetics ought to be seen as applied physiology. Nietzsche's objections to Wagner's music are physiological ones, as he explicitly states himself. Wagner's music drama affects Nietzsche's physiology such that it doesn't increase his strength. And this is his main reason for rejecting his musical creations. However, this approach has further implications for the question concerning the evaluation of total works of art, whether they necessarily have totalitarian implications. If Nietzsche's aesthetic twist is plausible, then one's own psychophysiological reactions to a work of art, as well as the reactions widely shared by others, are the ones which should be seen as central for aesthetically evaluating artworks. Different people have different psychophysiological needs, affects, and desires. Consequently, each person needs to find the artworks which are needed by them. It should not be the case that one specific cultural organization is needed by all people. If this is the case, then it could be inferred that there can be non-totalitarian total works of art. It merely needs to be realized that a work of art is a suggestion, an option, or an offer, but not the attempt of an ultimate solution or answer. It is this understanding which gets realized by Sven Helbig's total works of art. In his music drama From Lärm der Welt, on the noise of the world, that was commissioned and premiered by Weimar, by the Opera House in Weimar, in which the dangers related to embracing a utopia explicitly referred to. So far, the issue was not addressed whether Nietzsche's understanding of aesthetics as applied physiology implies an affirmation of overcoming nihilism by means of the realization of total works of art, music dramas or not. Arguments can be made which justify both readings of Nietzsche. I've argued elsewhere that Nietzsche stresses the need to overcome nihilism and wishes to promote the cultural movement in this direction by means of his own philosophical reflections. Nietzsche presents strong reasons in favor of his claim. However, I disagree with them, and so does a posthuman paradigm shift. Sven Helbig's musical pieces are such non-totalitarian total works of art. He sees his works in the tradition of total works of art. The way he treats topics and in which his works are performed reveal that they are not meant as mere entertainment without the same time being paternalistic. Philosophically, his musical oeuvre is shaped by posthuman thinking. The posthuman paradigm shift is decisively characterized by a new relational and non-dualistic anthropology, which is also the central starting point for explaining why Gesamtkunstwerke are possible again after this event. The aim of posthuman musical pieces is to convey a non-dualistic ontology of becoming. Non-dualistic thinking is a weak thinking, since every world perspective can only be understood as an interpretation. The concept of interpretation does not mean, however, that the represented view is wrong, but only that it can be wrong. It is therefore also not self-contradictory in the sense that the Cretan liar's paradox could be applied to this idea. The truth of this epistemological basic attitude cannot be shown, but it can only be refuted by clarifying the validity of an ontological ultimate justification. Since this has not yet been realized, the further strengthens the plausibility of weak thinking, pensiero debole, to cite my teacher Gianni Vattimo. Weak thinking is non-totalitarian, since each statement becomes an interpretation that cannot make the claim of ultimate validity for itself. It's rather a matter of drafts, proposals, and statements of assessment. The total work of art by Helbig are such suggestions. They do not claim they become the dominant due to their being ultimately valid. The musical gestures his musical pieces embody do not claim for their own ultimate validity. Although non-dualistic assessments are promoted, which are transported in them in many ways, at the same time, it's clear that the ultimate justification is not a claim that can be made against this background. Here, the recipient is confronted with posthuman musical creations in the form of the audience. The audience experiences, senses, and experiences posthuman thinking at the same time, can distance itself from it in order to reflect on it. It's a dialectical interplay between life world experience and the distance that enables reflection, which the recipient experiences during the performance. In contrast to the reform proposal of Plato, Galileo, and Wagner, the aim is not to realize a unified community. Halbig's total works of art make proposals that promote a certain interpretation in the self-relativizing way, but do not impose it on anyone. Whether his suggestions are appropriate ones remain uncertain. Proposals are being advertised. The performance makes it possible to confront this new paradigm and encourages the discussion of extra musical concerns. The intention of these musical works is not only entertaining, but rather leisure in the ancient sense. Otium, schole, in the context of which principles are not conveyed dogmatically, but options are reflected and experienced discursively. And herein lies the stimulating aspect of these posthuman total work of art. Non-totalitarian total works of art are therefore not only possible, but even meet the requirements of posthuman thinking. A relational ontology of becoming and mindfulness. It becomes particularly exciting, however, when we look at individual implications of the relational ontology of becoming, which are conveyed by means of analogies in his total work of art. We are no longer concerned with knowledge for the sake of having it, as in the ancient tradition. Thinking and acting no longer represent a categorically separated duality. Even the apparently small, insignificant everyday things become relevant. Where we live, what the climatic conditions are, in the places where we are, and what we eat now becomes philosophically relevant. Everything is constantly changing in every respect, and everything is connected with everything else, with each entity being nothing more than the sum of its effects on others, resulting in the dissolution of the essence of each entity. The constant becoming becomes the new being. These insights enable us to reconceptualize the worlds around us. Cows and pigs are kept in the smallest space on mass farms. Pigs are social beings and suffer enormously under these circumstances. Their excitement and urine affect locally available groundwater to prevent pigs from falling ill with the bacteria present in the bean and the barn. They are given antibiotics almost permanently. Mass cow keeping intensifies the greenhouse effect and associated global warming. Many people who have once seen the killing of pigs and cows, either directly or in a video, become vegetarians, at least for a short time. High consumption of red meat probably increases the likelihood of developing colon cancer in humans. When we realize that we as relational beings are fully part of nature and only gradually differ from all other purely natural creatures, then the question arises how we should deal with them. Which moral status should get attributed to pigs and cows? The intellectual as well as emotional insight of being comprehensively embodied in a multitude of relational interactions brings with it mindfulness. We pay attention to what we eat, how we eat, where we eat, with whom we eat, where our food comes from, and how it's produced. We also become aware of the social and environmental implications of eating meat. The richer a nation becomes, the more people are interested in eating meat because they can now afford it. Meat consumption is also associated with social prestige. I can afford to eat a fillet of veal. Many people feel good about representing, affirming their own social status in this way. The richer countries like China become, and the economic rise of China is probably unstoppable, the more people will want to eat meat, live in warm and beautiful houses, own cars, and want to travel. Hundreds of new airports are currently under construction in China. In percentage terms, private transport has an enormous amount of climate damaging gases. Helbig's total works of art present a relational ontology of permanent becoming as a suggestion. In the leisure time of aesthetic contemplation, we experience this and reflect on its implications. Here, it's not a matter. It could have reflected not only on on food, but one could on clothing, on any type of aspect in the life world and how it's related to everything else. So it's not a matter of analyzing how many angels fit on the top of a needle, but rather of quite everyday concerns of a widespread way of life, our nutrition, our handle of raw materials, our leisure activities, and our clothing. Aesthetically supported mindfulness meditations are mindfulness considerations about nutrition, clothing, and lifestyle. There is no categorically separated duality between thinking and acting. Relational and non-dualistic thinking promotes the embedding of thought and action. Aesthetic contemplation is not separated from action, but refers to it. And this is a paradigm shift. I do not go to concert just to enjoy beautiful forms or to suffer from disharmonies, but there is a close relationship between attending a concert and my own way of life. Relational mindfulness is relevant for all areas of life. The relational ontology of constant becoming experience as a suggestion, but is not imposed on anyone. And this is what makes Helbig's total work of art so special. And this is also sort of the difference to traditional leisure experience. At this time, it becomes clear that the new reevaluation of leisure cannot represent a return to the ancient Aristotelian aristocratic ethics. According to the ancient concept, leisure was of intrinsic relevance since Aristotle assumed the possibility of knowledge. After the posthuman paradigm shift, the basic attitude is no longer plausible. Instead, perspectivism now represents a plausible epistemological statement. Is it convincing that leisure alone is of intrinsic importance if every philosophical judgment is an interpretation and the existence of categorical dualities is convincingly doubted? Would not the sole focus on the vita contemplativa, as in ancient times, then be a performative self-contradiction? In order to revise one's own prejudices, the vita contemplativa requires the vita activa, through which the plausibility of philosophical judgments can be questions which lead to the necessity of further considerations. The vita contemplativa needs the vita activa, which in turn provides decisive impulses in the further reaching vita contemplativa. It's a dialectical movement between the various strata. And this is a significant implication for the re-evaluation of leisure. With the expansion of the norm of equality and with the dignity and personal status of all people in modernity, a flattening of social hierarchies has come about. The aristocrat whose life is dedicated to leisure no longer plays an exposed role in society in this spirit. All people have gained dignity due to their humanity. Nobles had so much that they no longer had to work. Work and dignity were linked. Leisure as a useless activity no longer played a central role in society. Work makes us useful members of the society. However, work is only a means to earn money, whereby money itself is only a means and not an end in itself. Work turns people into quasi-slaves. In the post-human world, however, such categorical dualities are dissolved or twisted. Master slave, otium labor, different processes happen at the same time. More and more people are now becoming aristocrats. Absolute poverty 200 years ago was 90% of the population worldwide, 80% in Britain. In the meantime, it has fallen to almost 10% worldwide. Through automation and digitalization, more and more people are becoming aristocrats. And this is accompanied by the possibility of changing the meaning of leisure, whereby leisure is in fact the activity of intellectually or essentially dealing with the fundamental philosophical challenges. If this movement were to be given alone, this re-evaluation would only be a return to antiquity, but this is not so. The cultural currents are also accompanied by a close connection between vita contemplativa and vita activa. Without action, thinking is not possible, which in turn suggests that one's own consideration should be put into practice, which also suggests the dissolution of the otium labor dichotomy. Without the plausible possibility of judgment, which is based upon an ultimate foundation, the sole focus on the vita contemplativa cannot be justified convincingly. The post-human paradigm shift is thus accompanied by what's happened here, is the um, the post-human paradigm is thus accompanied by an upgrading of leisure as intellectual and central reflection to philosophical challenges. On the other hand, a non-dualistically practiced leisure is a constant dialectic between otium, leisure, and labor, work, or in between vita activa and vita contemplativa. Is this analysis implausible since two seemingly contradictory concepts of leisure are both being affirmed? Against the background of non-dualistic thinking, the circumstance is rather given due to a linguistic problem. Our grammar focuses to make a decision between these two possibilities of meaning, since A and not A cannot both be true. However, this impossibility represents a linguistic compulsion and not necessarily a plausible description of our circumstances. For this reason, even a post-human re-evaluation of leisure is not simply a return to an ancient ideal, but a complex twisting of different processes in which the ancient high estimation represents one facet, which, however, must be complemented by a non-dualistic thinking. It's this twist of vita activa and vita contemplativa which clearly gets demonstrated in Helbig's music drama from Lärm der Welt. And so we really need to we're moving. It is really a paradigm shift which is occurring together with the post-human, where we're moving away from this dualistic separation. So the traditional concept of leisure is no longer possible. I'm coming to my concluding remarks. In a constant exchange with the ideal of ancient drama, thinkers, artists, composers have repeatedly put forward new proposals for reforming opera, in which the promotion of the dramatic unity has played a central role. The invention of the opera by members of the Camerata Fiorentina and Wagner's conceptualization of the total work of art have played a central role in this process. From today's point of view, their proposals represent dangerous pleas, then they are not used to promote totalitarian structures. Is this circumstance rooted in the fundamental structure of all total works of art? I mean, this was one of the central worries of Adorno. By reflecting upon Nietzsche's suggestion of aesthetics as applied physiology and by outlining central considerations concerning Sven Helbig's total work of art, it becomes clear that non-totalitarian total works of art are possible. Post-human thinking, and this represents Helbig's intellectual home, is non-totalitarian. It creates non-totalitarian total works of art which are at home in a post-human philosophy and are therefore to be assessed against the background of weak thinking, pensiero debole. The paradigm shift brought about by the paradigm shift associated with post-human thought is so fundamental that we cannot even begin to estimate the multitude of implications after all. It is accompanied by the dissolution of the dualistic ontological basis of Western humanistic culture. In Wagner's work, too, numerous approaches to post-human thought are already present. The gods of the ring can be interpreted as transhumanist posthumans. Actually, in Saarbrücken this year, this year it was Siegfried, but last year it was Welke before Rheingold. Basically, the ring is being interpreted by in a transhumanist fashion, which is extremely fascinating. And I had discussion with the directors, two ladies, two women from Hungary. They basically were the directors at this transhumanist ring in Saarbrücken. And by the way, we talked and sort of they already mentioned this to me then. They in next year they will direct in Bayreuth. They're responsible for the first time Rienzi being performed in Bayreuth. Anyway, the gods are so I'm already quite curious what will happen there. So the gods of the ring can be interpreted as transhumanist posthumans, and the use of language in Wagner's musical drama is an effort to move away from the ontological categorical dualistic conception. And these approaches could be of enormous importance in reinterpreting the relevance of Wagner's work for the present. The intellectual and sensual examination of Wagner, of Sven Helbig's metaformances, is particularly exciting and relevant for the present. His musical pieces are not performances, but rather metaformance, as a dualistic separation between artist and audience is removed. All participants leave the event after having been transformed by the metaformance of Sven Helbig's total works of art, which represent a confrontation with sensually mediated philosophical proposals. So many thanks for your attention. I'm looking
Um,
forward to the further discussion.
Many thanks for this thought-provoking presentation. Too many ideas, too many new ideas, too many suggestions, and too many brilliant findings. I want to ask the audience if someone have a question, please ask, or I will ask some questions. I have too many questions, but we have time limit, so I will ask some questions. And yes, we have time. Sorry, we have time. Okay. So my questions are about, um, for example, in Gottesdammerung, the main idea in Gottesdammerung, when civilization is dependent on power or gold as supporter of power, will destroy itself. Yeah, and the salvation, Wagner saw salvation in Gesamtkunstwerk, but after there was period of Nazism, and do you think that it prevented to flourish this idea? And do you see that Sven Halbeck's ideas about Gesamtkunstwerk, he presented, Sven Halbeck presented this idea, Gesamtkunstwerk, in real face. So the real face that is embedded in Gesamtkunstwerk idea. So maybe it's the next stage of Gesamtkunstwerk, and maybe it's flourished in our century, not in Wagnerian's time, because as I have told, after Wagner, we have a very hard and harsh period in politics. So, do you think that this is the real flourishing of Gesamtkunstwerk as idea in Sven Halbeck's works?
Yeah, many thanks. No, I do indeed. The thing is, the problem is whenever sort of something total comes up, it seems to have totalitarian implications. And it's interesting. It is very difficult for many people to even conceptualize when something's presented, when ideas about the world, about religion, about virtues are being presented, that they are understood, that they're not understood as something, as an ultimate foundation. And this is how it used to be in the history. Sort of whenever, sort of all the examples I mentioned from Plato, with the one exception, Gluck actually, but from Plato and Galilei, Wagner. And it was always the idea, sort of, look, this is not just my understanding of the world. And I'm trying to, I mean, also even going back to Plato with the understanding of tragedy, sort of, it is supposed something, the truth about the world. And the truth, of course, needs to unfold itself and needs to become dominant, because this will help people in the end leading good lives. And then the works of art are supposed to become part of the curriculum, are supposed to become part of are supposed to become of Plato's educational program, so that the people get the right appropriate kind of virtues, and the virtues will help them living a good life. And there's the one answer, and Plato understood what the human nature is all about. The composers in Plato couldn't access, or the musicians couldn't access the realm of forms, but they had to trust in the philosophers, but take them and then use it in order to basically bring about the human nature, and to help people structure their souls in a better manner in order to bring about the good life. And it was this tradition, and you can find that and this is still dominant also in Wagner, even though he was affirming, he clearly moved in his understanding. So he moved away from traditional Christianity. He was strongly influenced by Feuerbach. He was
Yeah.
strongly influenced, I mean, obviously by Schopenhauer's writing, but also, I mean, and with Nietzsche it was a bit more complex, because one mustn't forget that, you know, Wagner was born in 1813, whereas Nietzsche was in 1844. And 1813 was also the year in which Nietzsche's father was born. So it was more of a father-son relationship, and and Wagner didn't learn so much from Nietzsche. He rather thought he becomes the core, sort of the philosopher of Bayreuth, of the future work of art. Um, he should have learned more from Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is sort of the connection to our times. Because sort of by affirming naturalism, and Wagner was moving in that direction. He read Darwin. He was a big fan of Darwin. He employed evolutionary thinking, and with Feuerbach, a very this worldly, secular understanding of the world. Um, um, but still at the same time affirm, no, look, this is the final answer. This is the ultimate justification concerning the world. And what I'm presenting, what I, by Wagner, am presenting is actually supposed to be a cultural movement now away from this diversity which comes about. Now we need to realize it's a nihilism as a challenge, and we need to overcome the nihilism of our times in order to create a new unity, in order to establish a new community where basically people share the same kind of understanding of virtues. And so in this respect, there, the criticism by Thomas Mann, by Adorno, by others can actually be understood, because whenever there's a too much cohesion in a culture, um, it does suppress the diversity of human flourishing. And that's a problem, and that actually doesn't go along. That is not a necessary part. That's actually in tension with his own naturalism. By affirming naturalism, he shouldn't have approached such a totalitarian, such a unified, or such a fundamental understanding of human nature is all about. Um, and this is the one element which Nietzsche grasped, because he was affirming naturalism, something which is a very dynamic ontology of permanent becoming. But once you start with such a naturalistic ontology of permanent becoming, then it necessarily leads to an epistemology of perspectivism, that everything becomes an interpretation, whereby an interpretation doesn't mean that it's false, but merely that it can be false. And that means, there are a lot of different understandings of the good life which needs to be considered. And this is sort of so with Nietzsche's perspectivism, we move into the 20th century. And here suddenly with and in that respect, so Sven Helbig took up the tradition of a total work of art, and it was and it also makes sense. And this is where he differs from the traditional avant-garde tradition. So the tradition from Schoenberg and Stockhausen and Riem, because um, because in that tradition, what became dominant was merely the element of criticism to go against the totalitarian. Um, and after the experience of the Third Reich, obviously, there was it was clear why that element became so dominant in the arts.
Yeah.
In particular, I mean, in Germany, that was particularly as highlighted in particular, but it's a worldwide phenomenon, obviously. So there was in the arts the need to move against totalitarian tendencies, and criticism became the central factor. And so, as a consequence, there was a strong reaction, or there was a hesitation. There was a hesitation to embrace any kind of totality or any total work of art, because one was always wondering, isn't that a return to Third Reich aesthetics, to Leni Riefenstahl, or but the thing is, and the element is. Once you move into the tradition, once you move into the avant-garde tradition, um, in the ideal case, in order to break free from entire musical history, each individual work needs to be a genre by itself, needs to avoid any kind of harmony, any kind of musical beauty, symmetry, proportion. And because in order to affirm the criticism. And that is a problem, because only an intellectual elite under such circumstances, you need to be prepared to listen to Riem. You need to be prepared to listen to Stockhausen. It's not a music which you can easily digest, or which appeals to a greater audience, to a intellectually trained audience or musicologically trained audience. And it was so, and the reason why Sven Helbig was embracing now the total work of art, because he thinks no one should be able to compose lullabies again. One should be able to, embrace musical forms. It needs to be something which the, parents sing to their children when falling asleep. It needs to be, people need to want to go to the opera houses. And the opera houses, the contemporary operas, they need to talk to the people. They need to not just talk to an intellectually trained elite audience, but they need to talk to the people and have something, and be engaged with contemporary reflections, with contemporary issues. And that's what he's doing with his. The total work of art is a way to move away from just from an elite intellectual audience, to embrace again musical beauty, symmetry, proportion, so that it appeals to a wider audience, but without making the claim that whatever is being said, whatever is being presented, is supposed to be the ultimate justification. Everyone needs to follow these understandings of what the good life is about. So it's basically the artist, confronting the audience with the challenges of our times, confronting them in an appealing manner, so that it is also like essential pleasure simply to relate to these works, but also confronting them with the challenges we are all confronted with and presenting their own suggestions. But they're only meant to be suggestions, not ultimate justifications that everyone must stick to these answers. So it is totally, it's a total work of art. So insofar it again appeals not just to an elite academic audience, but actually to the people. The people, they're people. It doesn't even have to be, and sometimes he doesn't want to be performed in a concert hall because he goes to alternative spaces in order to lower the barrier for younger people to enter these spaces, because it is important, this engagement, this confrontation with the works, with the reflections, which are being dealt with in these musical works. So they're musically accessible, but and he's presenting solutions, he's presenting suggestions, reflections, but it doesn't mean that everyone, he's trying to overpower the audience, that everyone must subscribe to these suggestions. But they're merely seen as ways to start engaging the thinking of the people, the feeling of the people, and trying to find better answers to the questions we are all confronted with. And that is why, and that is a significant shift, a significant twist which has occurred together with the post-human paradigm shift. And that's the spirit of like a proper, non-totalitarian total work of art. Now, finally, we can it takes under consideration that there great diversity of different, human understandings of the good life, and basically the arts engage, and there's this openness, the openness of being human, and we get confronted whether there's a resonance with the work of art. Whereas, is there a constructive interference or is it destructive interference? Some works don't talk to us. But if there's then we learn something about ourselves. We engage with someone else's perspective, and then it helps us to being confronted with the challenges we have nowadays. And this is what I think makes that approach so highly relevant for our time. So it is. There can be total works of art. Art is aesthetic or challenging, aesthetically valuable music doesn't have to be composed solely for an intellectual elite. It actually can be made to appeal to the public without being totalitarian, without claiming to have a fundamental answer. And that's, I think, what is one of the most beautiful, one of the most relevant moves which has occurred in recent times.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I have some questions, if I can.
Okay, please. Okay.
Sorry.
Please.
Yes. Thank you very much for this really interesting presentation, Professor. I agree with many of the things you just said now also, and I'm curious, how do you see some of these perspectives? I'm Libor Newpole. I'm a composer, pianist, and inventor, one of the founders of the first modern music faculty in Kosovo here, just to tell you who is speaking to you. So I am curious to ask you in relation to what you said. If let's say if Beirut was 19th century's human kind of upgrade system from Wagner, what, in your opinion, would be the compositional analog today if we say like Wagner was alive today? And in relation to what you said to lullabies also, I mean, I completely agree that we have to work together towards bringing the social function that especially contemporary music has lost during the 20th century. And I'm a very big advocate of this. But what is this from your perspective? Because you talk about lullabies, but there are people with various spectrums of perceptual capabilities of music and of pitch and timbre, and they sing very differently. Not all of them have a innate sense to reproduce certain melodies as we think. We say lullabies, but lullabies mean very different from many cultures and from like microcultures within the country, depending on what level of hearing and of kind of, let's say, musicality the parents have, and the children will inevitably also kind of have that similar sound perspective when they grow. So how would you think, some people say that integration of pop within or pop perspectives and the pop ways of using that functionality could help reestablish this kind of link that the 20th century has lost. And I'm curious because I think from your study there's a lot to, especially what you say with Wagner now. It would be very interesting to find this new reinterpretation that you say, to find a place for it, even when we teach. So I'm curious, what do you think would be that kind of compositional analog today from your perspective when you talk about all these? Because in the end, we are talking about some kind of music that will be present in our lives from new composers, not just the pieces that were written before. What could be the lesson here in or the example here? Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Well, wonderful question. No, this is exactly what I've been talking about with Sven a lot. Um, and sort of, in particular, sort of when you said sort of it's pop music, it's classic music, the distinction. And he doesn't even like to be referred to as a classic composer. I mean, yes and yes, no. But he always
Nobody did.
As a consequence, he also I mean, he consciously worked with Rammstein. He works with the Pet Shop Boys right now on some piece which we already realized on the life of Turing. So, life of Turing, the founder of AI, a topic which is currently of central relevance, being dealt with by a classic composer, being worked on together with the Pet Shop Boys. So that that will be released next year as a proper album. So far, it was only performance. So exactly, we see it's a disillusion of the traditional understand. That's pop, that's classic. And that's not a helpful distinction. There's music which appeals to the hearts, which is also relevant, which confronts us with the challenges of our time. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's not an affirmation of very simple-minded just entertainment music. But just because something sounds appealing shouldn't make it a priori sort of something which cannot whose aesthetic value necessarily needs to be undermined. And there's
Absolutely.
a strong Adorno tradition with just, no poetry after Auschwitz. So once you make something a lullaby, once you make something too pleasing, it already means, oh no, that's escalator music. That cannot be taken seriously. That's not something which deserves musicological reflections. And I don't think, it's this approach. So it doesn't have to be, it's not like the latest house music, that we should, recognize all latest house music intellectually. No, that's not the case. However, just because when we make something appealing, which people maybe even can dance to, it depends on the way it is done and who's dealing with it. And
I actually think to dance to, that's a very big thing we need to bring
I
back.
agree. Exactly.
So why not to dance to?
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely. I
it's
perfectly
completely
agree.
human.
Exactly. No, I was just, it's not all the dance music, but there is a lot of dance music once it's done properly. This is exactly what can be appropriate music also, by dealing with the appropriate stance, classical developments which has taken place. Traditional music was dance music too. This is what the people in the courts were dancing to. I was actually at a Posthuman at some kind of e-festival in I think Rotterdam. And during the day, I was giving, my philosophical presentation. Then there were performances. Then there were video installations. And from midnight on, there was a club event up by really well-developed club music up until 6 in the morning. And this is sort of after with Adorno, there's such a hesitation, basically. This is just entertainment. We shouldn't take it seriously. And I'm trying to, and it's particularly strong in Germany, actually. Probably in many faculties, I'm trying to show, no, lullabies, dance music, that can, if done properly, that can be excellent ways for continuing, contemporary, classic musicians without actually, in between classic and pop. But that's why I don't like to even refer to it. That's why I would call it like post-human music. And I think that's a wonderful way forward in order to confront people with the challenges, with the question of our time, but also by appealing, by liking the music, by just having the sensual appeal. And that's a necessary element, and it shouldn't undermine the possibility of simply taking it seriously, intellectually, or academically as well. Yeah, so
So
wonderful.
you would call it post-human. I call it post-genre, and I've been using this term for some time now and trying to put it forward. But I think there's this destructive imperative that the whole 20th century has had, and it's leading towards this, and especially AI now is showing like that. Yeah, okay, this human. Yeah, look, I'm not gonna take all of your time. It was a pleasure to hear you. I would really like to make a connection and potentially also
please do so.
Have a workshop with my students.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so, I'd love to. Let's get connected on social media, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your works.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. Ciao.
Thank you very much, and I want to commend both of you. When one journalist asked Guy Rancelli, our world-known composer, "What music do you prefer? What music are you listening to? Jazz, pop, rock, hard rock, or classical music?" He answered, "I categorize music into stages: good music and bad music. So I listen to good music. Never mind." So thank you very much. We have 7 minutes. So any questions? Or I have one question, one short question. So I was now thinking about Wagner and how you think that in the future, can AI-generated vocal voices affect deeply on our emotions than human voices? How you think? And the short question, how might future technologies reshape the ontology of musical performance, the body expression, presence, and the audience experience? So do you think that AI-generated music challenges traditional human-based definitions of artistic authorship and or does it expand them in post-human directions?
Yeah, no,
So
great question. That's, AI, since at least since the release of ChatGPT, everyone's talking about AI and the use of it. And also recently, we've basically seen, and I've talked a lot with Matthias Röder, who's a friend of mine. He was, as well as with Sven about it. Matthias Röder he studied musicology. He got his PhD in Harvard on Beethoven. And then by working on Beethoven, he was thinking, look, there are short fragments of Beethoven's 10th Symphony, like 15 to 20 seconds. Let's create Beethoven's 10th Symphony, and so he got the support of Deutsche Telekom. And in 2022, I think he released two movements of the 10th Symphony, which was a big project with composers, musicologists, and is performed all over the world. Um, and that really works extremely well as a being performed by symphony orchestras. Or Sven Helbig was doing the same thing when he said, why should we only recreate recreate music stuff in the spirit of that composers? Let's do it with someone living himself. And he was playing around with his album Skills with AI based on his own works, and basically in some circumstances the result was really inspiring and really innovative. And so he took the music and then developed it further, orchestrated it properly. And in some circumstances during his concert, he replaced some of his own pieces with the music, which was then inspired by him, AI generated, but then orchestrated and developed further by himself. Because the innovation worked extremely well. And the thing is, I still think sort of the aspect of creativity in the end is a human thing, but the aspect of innovation is actually can be done by a lot can be done by AI. And so we get a lot of, so just by entering prompts in the way we enter prompts in an LLM, we enter loads of musical information into such a large language model, and then we say what we want to develop, and then no matter what whenever we press sort of generate, then the AI will provide us with a new innovative solution, one which has never been done before. It's a different solution. It's a very different answer whenever you ask it to generate one. So, and it generates indefinitely, and sometimes the responses work better than at other times. But sort of the question is, sometimes but then it's up to the composer or the artist. In that case, you can say, well, oh, that's really intriguing, because the composers still have, has feelings, has intentionality, has consciousness, self-consciousness. That is something which AI does not have. Not yet have. I don't think it will gain it so soon, but sort of that engagement, that emotional engagement, is something with respect to the innovative music being generated by an LLM. And then one can take such elements and then, okay, that's a really interesting musical thought. And I take it, I develop it further, I orchestrate it. So it's not that we don't have strong AIs, we don't have super intelligence, we don't have algorithms which say, I want to create a piece of music. And I don't think we'll get that very soon. So it's not that the LLM or the AI is creating the music, because it doesn't have the intention to do so. However, it can be extremely innovative in realizing musical ideas. And then the composers, with the engagement with the specific pieces, can take parts, develop them further, reduce them, orchestrate them. And so in a way, it is like what we do when we use YouTube, when we use any digital means so far, in order to develop further our skills as a composer, as an artist, as a philosopher. Is the same thing, actually. It can be extremely inspirational, helping to think about possibilities, and then take these on board. But then it is still the creative factor in the end comes down to the composer. And if it's only the case, I will choose one specific piece which I want to integrate. Maybe that's all what creativity then all is about. But a lot of the innovative factors can be realized by algorithms. And I suspect in the same way as, one used to write scores by hand. Nowadays, most people will use the computer in some way. The computer in together with an electric piano. You play it in, then you make changes there on the computer. So we're lucky we don't have to write on the walls of caves anymore. And we don't want to go back to these. Some skills, it's useful to preserve some skills, and it sounds like a loss, but in many circumstances, it's I know a friend of mine who developed the media design of Minority Report, four-time Grammy winner, and he was, but he also said, he studied calligraphy, and his study of calligraphy was actually very inspirational, very helpful for his way, he's twisting these traditional elements into the aesthetic of the future. So the future needs the past and needs the skills, and then you take on board and develop them further. And the same thing applies to AI as well. And we don't have to be afraid of AI taking away our jobs, of AI replacing, because in the end, the AI doesn't say, I want to go to the beach because I love the sunshine and the smell of salty water, in the same way as the AI doesn't say, no, I want to write a requiem about, it's because it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. However, once we use these various, once we incorporate LLMs, it can be extremely stimulating and helpful for innovative process. So I think it's a great development, actually.
Yeah, thank you very much. During your speech, you mentioned new staging of Wagner with post-humanistic tendencies, and I want to ask you for the next ROST Congress to share with ideas about post-humanistic ideas in Wagner's music.
Absolutely.
That would be great for us. Thank you very much for
Thanks
this
a lot. It's been a great pleasure.
It was a great honor for us. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you very much. So now we have a next session.